Peace, y'all. Okay, so we are back for lesson 3.5, and I want to go ahead and wrap up this particular lesson so we can go on to some other things. I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to do one today because my daughter had a dentist appointment today, but I got enough time. I can fit y'all in. But yeah, so we got some hard work to do because I be getting the downloads, man, and the pieces be coming together. And I have to decide, you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. So I have to decide whether I want to go through the slides that I do ahead of time, or do I need to start condensing and so on and so forth. So far, lesson 3 has been a roller coaster ride, with regards to the messianic prophecy, how these things are encoded in the stars and whatever else. And so we need to go ahead and put a pin in it so I can move on to the next thing and then show you what is going on underneath all of this stuff. So we were dealing with this root right here, Sakara, where it was dealing with the fire, and then that most commonly gets interpreted as hell. And then we determined that the etymology of that word means basically like to cover or conceal, and also to save, because the same thing that keeps you locked in because the things you did also helps to keep other things locked out, right? Okay, so ain't nobody saying hell is good or bad, but what I'm saying is this kale, interestingly enough, this Proto-Indo-European root that is actually associated with that word, it's also where we get cell. So you can get thrown into a cell in jail, or you got cells in your body. So just keep that in mind because it's very relevant. Now, when we move these guys around, so we got the same letter roots, still got the same letter, but then we got this guy moving to the end. All right, so instead of Sakara, we end up with Karasa. And so this is an interesting word because for the most part it means like to bite, pinch, poke, sting. But it can also mean like a disc, like to make something into a disc or to flatten something into a disc. And as a result, it also has to do with like pills or, stuff like this. Now, it is also a cognate, or an exact synonym rather. I'm selling it short. But it's actually a direct synonym to this right here, and Tifinagh, which I already established, we get from within that cubic line. So we've done a whole lot of talking about that, so I don't need to go back into that. But it is a synonym of that, and that is that word that, in addition to bite, consume, it also meant to burn up. So consume, and then most importantly, we had usurp, which connected us to Jacob, and then it was to be or become hairy, which linked us to Esau. You remember all that, right? So that's that Berber word. Okay, so we've got both of these essentially pointed back to the same thing, because we got this idea of the fires of hell, and then we got over here, we got this concept of the burn up. Okay, and so what causes these two things? So we got Sakara or we got Karas. What causes these two things to end up with the same meaning? Well, let's look at it. So if I take these Ka, Ra, and Sa, I got a gematria of 100 here, Ra would be 200. And then the Sa, that would give me 90. So in total, that gives me a value of 390. Okay. Now, if I do the same with Sakara, it's going to give me the exact same thing because I got, all I'm doing is moving it around 90, 100, 200, 390. So that means that these two things are associated with the same thing. So we end up with the same similar etymology, but it ends up meaning two different types of things, right? Two different types of usages, but it has like a common theme. So what we need to do is we need to look at the gematria of the whole 390 to see what is the base, interpretation that we want to look at. And so 390 breaks up into 300, which is Shin. And then we've had a good conversation about how Shin manifests. Okay. And then we have 90, which brings us right back to that Sa again or whatever. So Shin and Sa. Okay. So that gives us two potential meanings, and I want to show you something with the that's a Sa, so I don't want to deal with Zadi stuff. All right, but the obvious word that comes out of there is the Shi Sa. Okay, so I want to show you real quick what the word Shi Sa means and which languages it means it in. So right off top, Swazi, that's a Bantu word. And then we got Zulu, a Bantu language. Zulu, also a Bantu language. You have the exact same meaning. So why is this gematria bringing us back? Burn hot, ignite, to be hot, set on fire. Why is this Bantu word doing the exact same thing that the Arabic word is doing? But more importantly, why is the full gematria that doesn't take into account these orders giving us that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is the important part of this lesson, given everything that we have discussed. All language derives from geometry. And as you know, geometry, if I have a 3D shape, I can change the projection of that thing. That was central to our conversation from the beginning. Whereas I have a projection of a cube. Like if I'm looking directly at one face, that'll give me 4. If I do a hexagonal projection such that those points meet at the middle, that's going to give me 7 visible points with 1 hidden. And so I would have to do a projection like this in order to see all 8. And then we determined that this is part of the limitation that generates our 3D physical experience. Through the Legendre's 3-square theorem. Okay. So you remember all that. So this is your cell. That's your cell. So when it's talking about that, it's not talking about a typical hell. Now, I get into all of this to drive home something very important. We'll come back to this. So keep in mind, so this is geometry that we're talking about right there, which means the exact same thing as gematria. Gematria is the number system that is embedded in the Bible. As a result, the Torah and the Quran. So this means that we've got Hebrew hands on this. We've got Greek hands on this. We've got Arabic hands on this. And for whatever reason, everything is pointing back to this Bantu, these Bantu languages, and then these shared roots between these different Bantu languages like Zulu and Swazi. Now, there's only one other language that shows up here, and we've talked about this, and it's Japanese. Now, I didn't talk about this in the previous talk, and it kind of ties into this chapter. I don't know if it was supposed to be this one or the lesson 4, but if you know anything about Yasuke, Y-A-S-U-K-E, that's how that's supposed to be pronounced. It's not Yasuki or none of that. It's Yasuke. If you know about Yasuke, they talk about him. He's the first, he was a black samurai, so on and so forth. I forget exactly which one from the East, but they say that they suspect that Yasuke was from a Bantu tribe. Okay. And so it should be of no surprise that the other place where Shisa shows up is in Japanese. All right. So you have to signal, implication, indicate, so to give a sign. All right. But then you also have this word parallax. Let's look at what parallax means. Okay, so to cause to alternate. So an apparent shift in the position of two stationary objects relative to each other as viewed by an observer due to a change in observer position. So you have this thing called wiggle spectroscopy. And if you don't know what that is, you've probably seen one and just not known that that is the word for it. So I'm helping you expand your lexicon a little bit. Wiggle. Oh, my bad. Excuse me. Wiggle stereoscopy, because it's the stereo part that's the important words for and root in it. So open up a GIF. See if it'll operate. There you go. Okay. So as you can see, it's with this GIF, basically what you do is you alternate slightly between, two slightly different 2D pictures, and it gives the effect of a 3D scene. So in other words, you having two eyes and the universe being made up of vibration is very, 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 very possible that what you interpret as a 3D environment in your reality is actually an animation of two alternating frames. Okay? So this is what allows us to take something like this 2D figure and be able to see multiple sides of it at the same time, and then feel like we're in a 3D reality. Why is that important? Because all of this burn up talk and us talking about geometry and whatever else, fire is associated with the tetrahedron. This guy right here. There is a projection of the tetrahedron. So as you can see, tetrahedron has 4 points. Just like this guy has 4 points. And there is an angle that I could turn the tetrahedron. Like if I bring this point down, if I rotate it down so that that point points downward, there is a projection of the tetrahedron that actually appears like a square with a cross in it. So it still has 4 points, but now it appears to us like it's got 5 because this intersection. So you don't know from the shadow. We don't know whether this is a tetrahedron or a pyramid, and that's kind of the point. Because when they're aligned in this 2D format or whatever, information can be exchanged. Even in your brain, after you've seen what I just did with that transition right there, now you can kind of connect how this thing could also look like the top of a pyramid. Like the one you got up in Giza. So it's like it's got four sides up here and one up under, so it's technically 5. So this guy right here, so if it was the other pyramid, it would have 5 points, 8 lines, 5 faces, while this guy only has 4, 6, and 4. So that's a difference of 1, 2, 1, which is the second line of Pascal's triangle, totaling 4, such that it's telling us in 2D both of these have the exact same projection at a certain angle. Why is that important in a conversation about Greek, Hebrew, and Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, relative to all the things that we've been discussing? What does this tell you about geometry? What does this tell you about scripture? What does this tell you about words? It tells you that you have to consider the meanings that come out of every order of the letters in those words. Because depending on the sequence, depending on the order, it can mean one or two things. And so we've talked about this, how, the idea of Jesus descending from the line of Jacob was basically the transition from line, so the symmetry breaks on line 8, and you remember Jacob's laws that he made for his people. That's talking about the cube. So that is that restriction that was placed. So we remember we had the 16-point Adinkra symbol, and then we folded it so it had 8 points. And so this is what we're talking about here. And the descent from that line is this. And so again, I have to break that symmetry of the 16. That leaves me with this 4, 6, 4 of the tetrahedron. Okay. All right. And that's our fire. So dry, fire, sharp, in contrast to water, wet, smooth, in terms of polyhedrons that are complex enough to where they kind of function similar to spheres in 3D, except because they have at least somewhat corners to them, you can build lattices, because a sphere itself has an infinite number of points on it technically. That's the concept of a sphere. The surface is made up of infinite points. And so in order to break up that infinity and break up that supersymmetry, you use like an icosahedron, which is what water is. And so in my 2D projection, I would draw my icosahedron as basically 2 of these tetrahedron in here, and then I would put a baby one in there. So it's like a fractal, like you're seeing something reflect over and over inside of itself. Okay? And that is related to the next line, line 5, which is a pentaract instead of the tesseract. And then the symmetry break off of that gives me the 30 that I need for the 30 that I need for the faces of icosahedron, because this breakdown is like that right there. Okay, so that's how I get the faces of it. And then Yaka he wrestled with the face of God. That's what Peniel's name is. So it's like so that whole story is a geometry lesson at the end of the day. And if we recall, so I've got about 6 different orders that I can so that 390 is at the middle. And there's 6 different combinations that I can make out of that those 3 letters, that Ka, Ra, and Ta. Okay, and let's go ahead and call this Shisa. I could also make it Sashi. Let's see if we can find an occurrence. Matter of fact, I think the best way would be, I'm gonna go on Google here, and I'm gonna do, and this will be a useful. I go Sa Shin. I have written that before. Let's see what it says. Okay, and then we might have to go to AI mode because it'll be adding but on the regular search. Okay, so Shin refers to proto submitted by consonantal root here. Curious. So it's just basically the same as Shin. So it's basically like 2. So you can see how you can get both burn and bite from the 2 associated with that. Okay, so that confirms for us that we are definitely dealing with all that stuff that came out of CC. Now, out of that, out of those 3 roots, the Ka, Ra, Sa. Okay, so we can just leave it like that. We got the Ka, Ra, Sa. I can switch the 2 at the end, so I got Ka, Sa, Ra. I can start out with my R such that I have Ra, Ka, Sa. I can switch those out so I have Ra, Sa, Ka. I can start out with the S this time so that I have Sa, Ka, Ra. And then I can switch that around such that I have Sa, Ra, Ka. So those are the 6 combinations that will all add up to 390 at the end of the day. And so some of these might be actual words, like we've already checked this guy out. We're not going to go through all of the others right this moment because it's not necessary. But the point is they all come from this 390, and our Bantu languages are, so this is confirmation related to Benue Congo folks. So everybody got their stuff from the period when the Benue Congo languages divided. And so some went one way and you end up with Yoruba and all of them, and then some went the other way and you ended up with Bantu. But the core teaching of the arc that is informing everybody's stuff is coming from the same thing. And so we have this framework for which you're able to encode numbers and then derive meanings from them, derive a certain number of meanings from them. And this is why you typically have triple letter roots for this exact reason right here. All right, and so this brings me to another important Important point. Okay, so this is all of these are leading back to the center. This is why we call it a Merkaba. It's our vehicle. It's our chariot. The word Nagar that's associated with the creation and with Jesus's occupation can also mean chariot builder. So somebody who knows how to build a chariot. So this is why Karash, we'll get into those roots about Karasa and Karasu and all of that again in a moment, because that is very relevant to this. But I want to show you, if you don't have my book, which you should have by now, The Leopard and the Mirror Canticle of the Mutant Guardian on Amazon. I talk about this. It's in the book. But since it's relevant to this conversation, I'm going to go ahead and get into it. Now, I talk about this figure that, came out of me doing certain stuff. All right, let me see if I can get to the first slide. Let me see. All right, this one will work. Okay, so I go through this whole thing where I realize that, let me see if I can find one of the first slides of it. I think that's a good one. Okay, so I realized that our Latin A, which is derived from the Greek and the Phoenician or whatever else, so that's that same lineage of the Greeks. The Hebrew Aleph, so it's a particular font, I forget which one is related, the square letters systems or whatever that Ezra helped hook up. So the Hebrew Aleph and the Arabic Aleph. I noticed that though all of these are related to they are all the letter A, the first letter, all have a value of 1. So this is 111 in gematria right here. When you write it this way, it looks like it says Ani, A-N-I, which is Igbo for Earth. Okay, so Earth is associated with the cube. The inverse of that, Ina, is Yoruba for fire. And so this is Ina. So the tetrahedron, which is associated with fire in the Greek system, matches the meaning here. So it's showing you that there was this Benue Congo sort of root that gave rise to all of these. Okay, and so I took a tetrahedron and I wanted to spin it around and stick these in each spot, and then it came out looking like this, and then I was like, it kind of looks like a little running man or something, so forth. But then it occurred to me, I gotta send sound through this thing. Like, I'm learning this like while I'm learning some yoga stuff. And so and we've talked about this, when you're sitting in Ardha Siddhasana, which is the regular old cross-legged position or whatever, your body is essentially forming one of these. This is where your tailbone is in the back. These are your knees. And then this is your head here. Okay, so your body is in the shape of a tetrahedron when you are, in meditation and doing those particular practices. Okay, and so naturally I would need to send some sound through my body. Like, this doesn't do me any good. And so I started looking at the Sanskrit letter for A, because since I was dealing with these A's. And then mind you too, this one way was fire, and one was earth. If you make an anagram out of this, which is, it says the same thing front and backwards. If I went I-N-A-N-I, Inani happens to be a Bantu word, which means both gift and number. So somewhere between earth and fire, we get numbers. We get the gift of numbers. Okay, and so that's going to be very important in just a moment. All right, so anyways, when I was looking at that, I realized that the seed sounds, they're called the bija sounds, the seed sounds, they're associated with the 7 chakras. They tend to end in the sound am. So at the bottom, at the root is lam, then vam, then ram, then yam, then cham. So that's where cham, Ham, Noah's son, where his name comes from. Cham, and then at the top. Okay, and so I was like, okay, well, let me look at the shape of the letter for instead, and we're gonna apply that. And so when I stuck those together, kind of like a baby in a womb. So Odinani means it's in the earth. So Odinani is the name of the religion, the Igbo religion. It means it's in the earth. If I break that down into an uncontracted form, you see that it says Odi-Inani. So it's saying numbers in the earth. If I break that down further, I could break that down to Odi-Ina-Ani. So it's the womb of fire and earth. So in other words, I'm sticking this fire into this womb of sound and vibration, and then now it's starting to look a little like something. It's starting to look more like a little house, and then you see the little man sitting down, and there's his little head, and it looks like he's looking in the mirror, but it looks like it's something in it. It looks like it's like a snake in the mirror, like a serpent in the mirror, and then we've talked all about that stuff. So instantly you've got this reminiscent association with Ophiuchus, the orphan, the man wrestling the serpent. And so this is why it takes us back to that idea of Jacob, as you know, when he becomes Israel, it's because he's encountered the face of God and struggle with God. It's like, oh man, is the black man really God? I hate to tell you, but what it's really talking about is vibrating the surface of water. Okay, sending sound through the surface of water, you actually start to see the shape of the sound. Okay, and so this is the vehicle by which, like, if you notice, this perfectly lines up. If I overlay another one here, it perfectly lines up. If I connect these sides after now that they're connected, I'm getting that icosahedron water shape again. So the question becomes, can you really make water from fire? And then the answer is yes. Not fire as you're probably thinking of it, but fire is a plasma. So plasma is just too fast and too disorganized in it, when it's in its hot state. So we keep on talking about this heat and burning up and consuming, but when it is organized like through things like magnetic containment, so when a field is applied to it, or even when sound is applied to it, it takes on orderly shapes. And so as that plasma cools down, if it has the necessary components, like if it's like a hydrogen plasma or whatever else, there's water on the sun. You may not have realized that, but yes, because it's a hydrogen, based plasma. The spots near like the sunspots where it's slightly cooler than the rest of the sun, there's actually water. Like, I wouldn't say you could go swimming in it. I ain't saying that. I'm just saying there is actual water. There's liquid water and water vapor from time to time in there. And so when that ejects from the sun, it becomes ice out in space. And that is more or less how we get water in the first place. And so we talked about it before, where the difference between this thing being a liquid in being a liquid form versus a solid form is that it shifts from this icosahedral geometry into that toward that tetrahedral. So it's in between. Okay, it's starting to lean toward that. It becomes a lattice. And so if you look at a square in the first place, I mean a cube in the first place, that's all this is. This is a cube with two tetrahedra inside of it, and then it gives us the projection of the icosahedron. All right, so when I put my little man in there, I decide to spin him around because a cube has 6 directions. So you see how it's pointing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we got in 3D space, I can go front to back, left and right, and up and down. So when it hit me that this was a man in a 3D graph, I started doing some stuff with it. You can't see that stuff yet. You ain't ready for it yet. Okay, so what I did was, let me see if I got all the steps. Okay, so I placed them. So remember I told you the feminine is counterclockwise. And so I place her in the west, and then I rotated that picture 90 degrees each time I went to a different direction, and I got something that looked like this. So when I took him out of the fire, the shape that I got when I assembled it, and I rotated that way, that's what you end up getting. Now, I did the opposite. For the masculine, I placed them in the east, and then proceeded to rotate them clockwise. When I overlaid the two of those, it creates, so this is the initial overlay. So when you put those two reverse things, you start getting something that looks a little orderly. It doesn't really look like anything, really, but you start to see these shapes that look kind of like 3s and E's and stuff like that. Once again, not anything too serious. After I did that overlay, I did a horizontal mirroring. So that means I'm going to flip it along this. Hold on, let me see. Horizontal. Yeah. So I'm going to flip it like this. So I'm going to take a copy and I'm going to flip it and I'm going to overlay it. When I did that, this came out. Now, that kind of started looking like something, but this definitely looks like something. This looks like a little man with horns, and he's got an arrow pointing up, and he's in the up position. This looks kind of like a little bird lady with the feet here. It look like she got titties. Like the man and woman. These look like little hearts inside this box. Heart-shaped box. And then we got the left and right. These guys look almost identical, and they look kind of like, to me, they look like samurai armor. And which is interesting because in the West, in Edo, Benin, on the west coast of Africa, the armor of the Benin warriors from back in the day look a lot like the samurai armor in Edo, Japan. So we got an Edo in both. We got armor that looks alike. And then as they found out in the 90s, the same, the precursor to the D haplogroup that is common among indigenous Japanese, like the Ainu, its original form D0 was found in Nigeria. So it gets harder and harder to deny the links between the two. Now, when I alternated those, like by flipping it vertical, so remember I told you I was going around. So here I was rotating it around the Z-axis. Here I rotated about the X-axis, and then here I rotated along the Y-axis. Now it doesn't change a whole lot, but it changes just enough for me to notice that the mouth was opening and closing when I did that. So me being a millennial who knows how to work the internet, I went to a free GIF maker and put those two together as a 2-frame animation, and then here's what we get. So it looks like the characters are bouncing and talking, Now imagine how wow that was for me, knowing that all I did was piece together a couple of letters. Let me see, what was it? Yeah, piece together a couple of letters in the geometry and just make geometric transformations. Simple geometric transformation. I didn't have to do a lot of crazy stuff. I was not expecting something like this to come out of it, but for something like this to come out. Now this wiggle, remember what I just showed you with the wiggle stereoscopy? That's parallax. So for whatever reason, this word shisa that is coming out of this 390 gematria is perfectly describing the result that came out of me simply placing letters into those shapes, my reasoning being guided by the symbolism of the platonic solids. So you see something like this and it makes you think, okay, well, there had to be some intention in there. And then, you know, we could get into the symbolism of the horned man and the vulture. I can tell you right now, this has a lot to do with the hippocampus, because you have something called Ammon's horn, which is basically how and it's associated with the icosahedron, by the way. So that same shape is associated with your third eye. And what it is basically how your brain shapes reality, like your spatial mapping and your verbal mapping are involved with that. So I figured out that's what the horn man have to do. Of course, these are the 4 chambers of the heart. And in here, I just figured this out. It was either today or yesterday, but this is associated with the ankle chakra. So in the extended version of the chakra system, you have 2 more. You have the knee chakra associated with your ancestors, and in the ankle, you have the destiny chakra. Because our height, like the way our height is set up, where the throat chakra is located, it's a 1:8 ratio between what's above it and what's below it. So technically, the throat, so let me reverse that. The ankle is the octave of the throat. Okay, and we represented that in our double cube with go back and watch the older videos if you don't remember the associations. Peace, I see Daniel in the building. It's my dude. Okay. If you don't remember the associations we had with that, the square root of 2 is the length of the diagonal in a square. Remember, we were dealing with this 2D square. Square root of 2 corresponded to blue, or the throat chakra, and the relative lengths. And then in order for us to get to square root of 8, we had to double the length of that line, which gave us square root of 8. And then that was black because we're moving outside of the visible spectrum as a result. And then remember, if we kept on going, this becomes square root of 18. And so the numbers up under the square root or whatever are following the same pattern. 2n squared, which is the same as doing n times n plus n, like this, to get triple numbers. Okay, so if I plugged in 1 for that, if I plugged in my triple ones from my a Aleph, and Aleph, Ani, if I plug that 111 value into this guy right here, that's going to give me 2. All right, so because 1 plus 1 is 2 times 1 equals 2. Okay, and so that tells me how many is in my first orbital of how many electrons are in the first orbital of an atom. This is what we're really looking at. So we're doing quantum physics. We're looking at what's inside of an atom and all of that. Just looking at this geometry and this gematria. So this thing is technically at the center of all things. Like this map, this diagram is basically embedded in every point of space, and the practices associated with yoga and what the scriptures are supposed to be showing you is how to, if you understand the path that this is assembled in, it's basically telling you how we create ourselves, like the process that we go through to manifest from from the information of the universe and convert that into wave impressions within the substance of space, which is called Akasha, and how the role that sound plays in organizing plasmas. Remember, a plasma, so in the case of hydrogen, which is the number one, so this is one proton, one neutron, one electron. This is hydrogen that we're looking at. Okay. Well, in the case of hydrogen, it doesn't have but one electron to go around in the first place. Okay. And so if we remove that such that it becomes a H positive, so when you take away so an electron has a negative charge. So if I take away a negative, that's like me subtracting -1. So I've got a charge, a +1. Okay. So it doesn't have any electrons to interact with space. So this is invisible. You don't see this. So there's a soup of hydrogen ions that are just, coasting around our galaxy and our universe of stuff that you don't even realize is there. But when you're sending sound through it, it's organizing itself in certain ways, and it is pushing that plasma in the direction of, if it cools down, it can start creating forms. And then so all atoms are built on this foundation of these hydrogen ions, essentially. Okay. So that is the hidden secret. Now, what does this have to do with our messianic prophecy? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Okay. It takes us right back. Okay. So remember I told you that whole concept of Odi Nani as the womb of the fire and the earth, and then how we said the fire is related to that tetrahedron, and then that earth is related to the cube. Well, a cube is you can look at a sphere as the spinning of a cube in all directions. So that is an esoteric, I don't want to call it a secret, but that's just one of those things that's taught in there, that you think of a sphere as the rotation of a cube in all directions. Okay. And so if you think of it that way, then you get this image in your head. If I take a sphere and I inscribe a tetrahedron inside of it, something interesting happens. So, especially now, if I could do this, I can mirror this both directions. Go ahead and connect that. On the planet Earth, if you do this, this hits at exactly 19,471 degrees. 19,471 degrees. So these latitude lines. So we got, this is in the north, this is in the south. Okay, so what's special about this number right here, this constant, this 19.471, is that it represents the hottest places on any like the hot zones of energy on planets throughout the solar system. So for us, it's where Hawaii is. So like where all those volcanoes and stuff are in Hawaii. And then in Jupiter, on Jupiter, it would be where the eye of Jupiter is. On Mars, it's where you see like the what they call it, Olympus Mons or something like this, or whatever. So Mount Olympus on Mars is located here. So it was a big active volcano at one point, and that's why it creates these large mountainous type structures. And so this angle, it keeps on coming up. In fact, that same 19, you round it to 19.5 degrees, this same angle shows up in our Great Pyramid. All right, and this number kept showing up. The full number kept showing up in studies of the Cydonia Pyramid. So the Cydonia Pyramid is essentially a a 5-sided pyramid on Mars. So you already know it has something to do with this right here, which we've associated with our body and even with Christ. Okay, and so this number keeps on showing up. Now, so given that this is the 19 code that we're talking about here, it would do us some good to associate this with the Quran. Well, as it turns out, Surah 47 just happens to be the Muhammad Surah. So it's the Surah that just happens to be named after the Prophet himself. Now, in the first line of it, 47:1, it says, I think I had it pulled. I might have gone off of it, but let me bring it back up. So we're gonna put in Surah 47:1 transliteration. As you can see, I was messing with that earlier already, so it's in my results. Okay, we're not gonna go through trying to pronounce that, but the literal breakdown of that: those who disbelieve and turn away from the way of Allah, He will cause to be lost or waste their deeds. So it's basically saying, if you turn away from Allah, your deeds will be for naught, be lost or wasted. Now remember, Allah is arm, leg, arm, head. We in the other video I broke down how in Surah 9:129 you had that line about sufficient for me is Allah. I broke down how the Hasbi root that they chose to use for that particular line doesn't mean sufficient the same way that that new so this root more correctly means sufficiency, whereas this one is more along the lines of to calculate or compute. Compute. So in other words, it says the computer is Allah, or the calculator is Allah. So it's telling you that your body, so the body of the original man, so this 5-point body of ours, is the calculator for everything in the universe. The math of the universe, you are the condensation of all the math of the universe. If you understand the relationships within your body by mapping it using sound, by sending sound through your body, you pretty much understand the dimensions of everything in the universe. Okay, and so that shows us that this whole tetrahedron and sphere relationship is literally the whole thing. Now, there's a school of thought that associates this sphere with the production of sound, and then this coming together, the two tetrahedron, this double tetrahedron, is considered the masculine and feminine spark that you get from each of your parents coming together at the root chakra. Okay, so this basic understanding is telling you the distribution of the math, and it gives you this interesting understanding of what this 19 code is pointing toward. Now, just for kicks, let's see what 471 means in gematria. Let's see, we'll do both. So in Arabic, we call it it's called abjad. So gematria and abjad meaning. Let's see if we get anything. We may or may not. Who knows? But let's see. Okay. Once again, let's go to the AI mode because I don't feel like going through Google's lightweight version. All right, so let's see what we get. So God sets up, God will establish, God is raising. Eliakim, it was a high-ranking royal standard under Hezekiah. The Merkaba, okay. What a coincidence. So we got a picture of a Merkaba here. And it says right here, the Merkaba, the divine chariot. In some mystical interpretations, 471 is used in complex calculations regarding the circumference or dimensions of the chariot, or Merkaba, contrasting with other divine values like 541, meaning Israel, to show relationships between creation and the creator. So ding, ding, ding. Looks like we have a hit. Now, the other interesting thing about that 471 is that the digits of it add up to 12. And so the Odi that's in Odinala can also mean midnight. And so if we have Odi plus Inani, which can mean number, the midnight number is 12. Okay? So, and 12 is the number of faces of, the lines in the cube. All right. So you're seeing how all of that comes together. So everything in the scriptures is built on gematria, and that gematria is based on the dimensions of the original man. So once we cross into Homo sapien mode in Africa and our proportions even out, it allowed us to be able to send vibration in our body in such a way to where through advanced yoga techniques, we were able to activate certain effects in both the gut and the brain to turn our body into an effective chemical factory so that we would not have to rely on psychotropic plants and roots that we use to advance our consciousness. So a large part of yoga, especially Isha yoga like that which Sadhguru teaches, is largely like breaking dependence from drugs. In fact, the Iboga root that they use in the Bwiti religion in Central Africa that I talk about pretty often, that Iboga root is used to help people kick opioid addiction. It's extremely effective. I'm talking about like in the 80s, like the percentile is like up in like the 80%, stuff like this. Like these folks, they go and they use this, and you know the intention of it is so that you can interface with the ancestors, because everybody that contributed to you being here today, their DNA is still in you. And so if you look at your personality and who you are as the coming together of all of those previous influences into one thing that you're building on top of or whatever, you've got 100% of all the people who came before you in you. And so these practices were designed to help you interface with that, be able to know what your destiny is. So this idea of connecting the third eye to the ankle chakra so you can be able to read what your destiny is. That concept is entirely what the scripture is based off of. And so you're not looking at just your destiny, you're looking at your particular angle of a collective destiny of you and mankind. And so the 12 that are being discussed right here is basically describing the 12 constellations. So the clock, that's what the clock is, y'all. So it's the 12 constellations surrounding the earth. And so what happens is the radiation, the light, the impressions that are coming from those directions all meet at the center. All right. So that becomes the bindu of the earth. So that's the center point. And then what ends up happening is the earth, because of its magnetic field and its relationship with the atmosphere, you have these lightning strikes. So remember, lightning is also a plasma, just like your fire over here. You have the Schumann resonance, which is 7.83 hertz. The octave of that, which is to double it, is at 15.66 hertz. That in a previous video I converted. So Wawa is Shesh, the number 6. The word for the number 6 in Phoenician. 15th letter is seen. So this is Siwa, which is an alternate spelling for Shiva. We talked about how Sheva in Hebrew is the number 7. So in other words, what it's telling you is that instead of being the octave, which is the edge of the universe, the cosmic microwave background radiation, we instead step that down so that we can actually experience it. And this frequency here that the earth is emitting is the same one that is close to what our brain is when it's in either alpha or theta, which is these states that can be entrained using sound so that you can have OBEs, out of body experiences. You can interface with the ancestors. What's happening is the ether, the vacuum of space, because it's based on these hydrogen ions, you basically got places where you have something, and then you have places where you don't have something. So that's binary. Okay? So the entire vacuum is full of binary code that is facilitated by alternation between something versus nothing. Your body is basically filtering because those particles don't interact with the physical space or whatever. They're still able, because they have charges, they're still interacting with your brain waves and your heart waves. Now your heart detects them, the magnetic field of your body detects it, but there's things that you have to do so that the pattern recognition software in your brain or whatever can organize those impressions in a way that makes sense to you so you can understand what the information is. And so this training that I'm giving you with respect to like geometry and all of that good stuff, it basically causes your brain to be able to click and be able to organize that information. Now, in these scriptures where it's telling you like your deeds will be for naught if you don't, they made it out to some worship, whatever else. But what it's telling you is, if you don't know the math of your body, of your own body, I'm not just talking about the body in general. If you don't at least subconsciously know the geometry of your body by sending sound all the way through it so that your brain can capture like an echolocation kind of picture of, like, you may not even be consciously aware that it's doing this, but it builds up that impression over time so that your avatar that you use when projecting your consciousness is more accurate and stable. So the same thing that happens when a plasma stabilizes and it can crystallizes, that's essentially the same science that you're using on the other side, such that it doesn't seem nearly as dreamlike and you're actually interfacing with information from the real earth itself, because the entire information of the earth is being beamed to that center and then it is beaming out. Now, the interesting thing about this 15.66 that I pointed out before is that on a cymatic plate, it looks like a 5-point star. So it has that 5-point geometry. So repeating over and over like a solenoid or whatever. And so it basically looks like the cross section of DNA. So if you take DNA and then you slice it, across or whatever, then look down at it, it looks something like a solenoid. And so the same type of shape. And so that same information is projecting you, is projecting all things on this planet. It is attuned specifically to this planet. So I don't want to get into the conversation of ETs and whatever else, but I'll just go ahead and tell you that's what the next lesson is really going to be about, because Nation of Islam, like, they have deep teachings about this. And the short version is that this 3D matrix that we're in, because there was no stable realities like this before that. It doesn't matter if there were other beings and other dimensions, blah, 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 blah. The start of time as we know it is with us. And so those beings who have always existed in time, they use us to, well, not us, but these human bodies that you have to manifest this way first. And then when we go off and we have space programs or we move to other planets or whatever else, we end up adapting to those planets and adapting to frequencies there. And then you start changing. So you can imagine over the course of hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years, we will look very different than we do on Earth, because we'll still have that 5-point geometry. But as hominids, or humanoids rather, we're going to have different morphology that is more attuned to the frequency of the planet. So in other words, our morphology and our functional consciousness on the planet Earth is attuned to these frequencies right here. So the Earth is broadcasting. And so the whole idea of the Christ is this concept that you have this one signal, that the more resonant you are with that signal, it's kind of like you're plugged into an internet. So it's like, so again, I'm about to cut this off in a second, but I've had, since I've been doing like the different trainings, I started realizing that there were more frequent times where I would receive downloads of information, and then that same information would be what one of those teachers was talking about like a day or two later or whatever. And so I started realizing that I could extract information from the network. So because everybody was meditating at the same time and using the same resonance in the body with those chants or whatever, I realized that we had a shared network. And then like if I wanted to know something specific, I just had to focus intention on that thing. And either during the relaxation of that meditation or later on when I was asleep or whatever, my brain would pick up those signals and then organize it in a way to where I could understand and I could write it down when I get out. And so there's nothing mystical mumbo jumbo about this. It's just all about geometry and the way that quantum information transfers through the vacuum. That's all it is. It's science. And then the fact that this has been mapped out so thoroughly, even before we left our origin, like wherever we were at on the continent, before spreading out, and then it became embedded in all of the religions. This is the reason why this has to be back engineered, so that you could truly understand what it's saying and then be able to activate your own body to be able to verify information in a real way. But that's enough for now. I just wanted to go ahead and get through all of that stuff today, and then I will be starting lesson 4 up tomorrow, and we'll be getting to some of the nittiest of the gritty when it comes to what are aliens really. You don't want to miss it. All right, y'all. I'm out of here. Peace.